Have you ever wondered how the world could have been different if the First World War never happened? This cataclysmic event not only reshaped the political map, but it also left an indelible mark on the collective psyche of humanity. Its global impact was profound, influencing the course of history and setting the stage for the world as we know it today. So, buckle up, as today, we'll delve into the chronology of the First World War, a conflict that changed the face of the globe. Our journey begins on June 28, 1914 in Sarajevo, a day that started like any other but would go on to change the world as we know it. On this fateful day, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was assassinated. The man responsible was Gavrilo Princip, a young Yugoslav nationalist. Princip was part of a group called the Black Hand, who sought to end Austro-Hungarian rule over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The assassination was not just a political statement, but a spark that ignited the flame of war. The death of Franz Ferdinand sent shockwaves through the diplomatic circles of Europe, leading to a series of events that would eventually plunge the world into a devastating war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not just a singular event, it was the spark that lit the fuse of a powder keg filled with political and national tensions. This assassination set a chain of events in motion, culminating in a global conflict. By August 1914, the world was at war. A complex web of alliances and treaties, entangled with national pride and economic interests, had dragged nations into a conflict that would reshape the global landscape. The Central Powers, primarily Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, stood against the Allies, led by France, Russia, and the United Kingdom. The early days of the war were marked by rapid movement and intense fighting. Germany, implementing the Schlieffen Plan, hoped to quickly defeat France, then turn their attention to Russia. This led to the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914. The French, aided by the British Expeditionary Force, managed to halt the German advance just short of Paris. This marked the failure of the Schlieffen Plan and set the stage for a grueling static war on the Western Front. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Tannenberg in late August saw the German forces inflict a devastating defeat on Russia. The Russians, with their ill-equipped and poorly led troops, were no match for the German Eighth Army. This victory boosted the morale of the Central Powers and exposed the weaknesses of the Russian military. But these early battles were only the beginning. Both sides, underestimating the other, believed in a swift victory. Little did they know that this war would last for over 4 long years, marked by unprecedented carnage and suffering. The Central Powers and the Allies in these early stages were testing the waters, gauging each other's strengths and weaknesses. The strategies they employed, the victories they achieved, and the losses they suffered, all played a crucial role in shaping the course of the war. These battles set the tone for what was to come, a war that was unlike any seen before. The war had begun in earnest, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The world had plunged into a new era of warfare, where the old rules no longer applied, and the scale of human suffering was unimaginable. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the world forever. As 1915 dawned, the nature of the war began to change. The mobile warfare of the early months had ground to a halt, replaced by a line of trenches stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea. This was the infamous Western Front, a brutal landscape of mud, barbed wire, and constant artillery fire. Trench warfare was a grueling, terrifying experience. Soldiers lived in narrow, waterlogged ditches surrounded by the stench of death and decay. Days would be spent in anxious waiting, while nights were punctuated by terrifying raids and the whistling sounds of incoming shells. But within this grim reality, there were also profound shifts in the methods of warfare. New technologies were making their mark on the battlefield. Tanks, then known as land ships, were introduced by the British in 1916. These steel beasts, despite their initial mechanical unreliability, began to break the deadlock, plowing through barbed wire and crossing trenches, all while withstanding machine gun fire. In the skies, airplanes, once used only for reconnaissance, were armed with machine guns and bombs, transforming them into instruments of destruction. The air war added a new dimension to the conflict, with pilots becoming the knights of this modern, mechanized age. And then, there was the introduction of chemical weapons, a terrifying development that added a new layer of horror to the battlefield. The Germans were the first to use chlorine gas in 1915, a weapon that caused suffocation and panic among the unprepared Allied troops. This prompted a chemical arms race, with both sides developing even more lethal gases and the masks to protect against them. These technological advancements, while innovative, escalated the war's destructive potential and the human cost. The Western Front became a deadly proving ground for these new weapons, a place where traditional warfare tactics met the ruthless efficiency of industrialized death. The war was becoming a deadly game of inches, with neither side willing to yield. In 1917, the war took a critical turn. It was in this year that the United States, a nation with vast resources and manpower, entered the global conflict. Until then, the US had maintained a position of neutrality, but two key events swayed their decision towards involvement. The first was the sinking of the RMS Lusitania by a German U-boat in 1915. This event triggered outrage across America, as more than 100 American citizens were among the nearly 1,200 passengers who perished in the attack. The second was the Zimmermann Telegram, a secret diplomatic communication issued from the German Foreign Office in January 1917 that proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico in the event of the US entering the war. When the British intelligence intercepted and deciphered the telegram, they passed it to the Americans. The revelation of this proposed alliance was the final straw that led President Woodrow Wilson to ask Congress to declare war on Germany in April 1917. With the entry of the United States, the war effort was significantly bolstered. American troops, also known as the American Expeditionary Forces, began arriving on the Western Front by the summer of 1917. The fresh and well-equipped soldiers were a welcome relief for the war-weary Allied forces. The United States also provided the Allies with much-needed financial and material support. The impact of the American entry into the war was significant. It boosted the morale of the Allies while simultaneously demoralizing the Central Powers, who were already strained by the prolonged war. The influx of American troops and resources played a pivotal role in turning the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. Indeed, the entry of the United States into the First World War marked more than just the end of America's neutrality. It marked the beginning of a new era in global politics, setting the stage for the United States to emerge as a leading world power in the 20th century. The entry of the United States marked a significant shift in the balance of power. By 1918, the end was in sight. The final year of World War I saw some of the most intense fighting, as both sides pushed for victory. The Allies, bolstered by fresh American troops, launched a series of successful offensives known as the 100 Days Offensive, effectively turning the tide of the war. The Central Powers, exhausted and depleted, were unable to resist. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. In a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France, representatives of the Allies and Germany signed an armistice, bringing the fighting to an abrupt halt. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the end of the war was just the beginning of a long and difficult peace process. In Paris, leaders of the victorious nations gathered to determine the fate of the post-war world. The negotiations were complex and fraught with tension. Each nation had its own interests to protect and scores to settle. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, in the opulent Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. The treaty imposed heavy penalties on Germany, which was held responsible for the war. Germany was required to disarm, make substantial territorial concessions, and pay reparations. These terms were deeply unpopular in Germany and sowed the seeds of resentment that would eventually lead to the Second World War. The treaty also established the League of Nations, an international organization designed to prevent future conflicts. But despite its lofty goals, the League proved ineffective, hamstrung by the refusal of the United States to join and the inability to enforce its decisions. World War I officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, but its impacts were far from over. The war left a deep scar on the world, causing immense human suffering and political upheaval. And the peace that followed, fraught with resentment and disillusionment, set the stage for even greater conflicts to come. The echoes of World War I can still be heard today, a century later. Looking back, World War I was a pivotal moment in global history. It began with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, sparking a war of unprecedented scale. Key battles were fought, and trench warfare, alongside new technologies, changed the face of combat. The United States entry tipped the scales, leading to the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the conflict but sowed seeds for future discord. Remember, history is not just about the past, it's about understanding the world we live in today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the First World War.